A game of Foxhole is a 24/7, month-long battle conducted by thousands of players. With player-run supply lines, bases, and offensives, this gives rise to a gameplay mechanic not often seen in video games. Immersive sieges lasting several hours to even a few real-life days. A siege generally occurs when an attacking party parks their troops outside an enemy base, while cutting off their supply routes, slowly starving the defenders of vital supplies like respawn tokens and ammunition. In Foxhole, these tend to happen around bases that are difficult to crack, or ones that hold key objectives like supply hubs and nuclear superweapons. And these battles often led to incredible last stands. Foxhole players often use the word hoi 4 as a verb to refer to encirclements like this, in reference to the encirclement tactics present in the grand strategy game, Hearts of Iron 4. I guess it makes sense since Foxhole is like a real-time strategy game, except all of the workers, soldiers, and logistics drivers are real people.
Leave me. Honor my memory. Go on without me, soldier.
Naturally, the key to any siege is cutting off the defenders' supply routes. In Foxhole, the more protected backline of a team's territory is typically home to their most efficient factories, facilities, and resource nodes. This prompts teams to bring up supplies with logistics trucks and ships along common pathways. Sieges tend to exploit this gameplay loop. On land, roadblocks are made to cut off roads through the use of small bunker bases, tank traps, actual tanks, infantry acting as partisans, or even just literal roadblocks using trucks parked on the road. And of course, storage depots and seaports are constantly shelled to make sure that the defenders can't pull any supplies from them. At sea, gunboats can take to the waters to hunt down logistics barges, and in a few cases, entire frigates were used instead, such as the one that camped the seaport during the Siege of Spearhead Island in War 117. And of course, pirates sometimes steal those incoming supplies for their own team. But the defenders aren't powerless to stop these. People can be sent to take out partisan bases cutting off supplies, and water blockades can be beaten back with enough artillery or boats of their own. And even then, supplies can get through with enough planning and, for lack of a better term, guts. Blockade runners are a godsend for the besieged. When the typical supply routes are out of the question, logistics personnel tend to get creative. Some try using unconventional vehicles like amphibious APCs to pass through unusual routes. Find gaps in blockades, make supply convoys led by gunboats, or even just slowly walk, carrying heavy crates of supplies through a mountain like their Sam Porter bridges. The most typical method, though, is to park a crane at a random cliffside and use it to pull supplies and vehicles from barges and freighters that snuck past blockades. Sometimes, with enough supplies, the defenders can even make dedicated piers for the endeavor. However, it can get pretty dicey. But those moments when all seems lost, only to see a well-planned logistics breakthrough bringing us some much-needed supplies, will always stay with me. But of course, even with a few successful blockade runs, there is a bit of a time limit to all of this. How long it'd take for the defenders to run out of supplies? The attackers usually set up a siege camp, from which they launch continuous artillery barrages that use up the defenders' stocks of basic materials for repairs, alongside respawn tokens called Schlatts used to return the dead to battle. And naturally, defending in general uses up a lot of ammunition and vehicles as well.
It's useless. Save ammo. Save ammo. Stop shooting. Stop shooting.
Death ammo!
Morale, of course, ends up being a key factor during a siege, and is occasionally propped up by religious zealotry.
Don't worry, you'll be embraced by our Lord under the sea.
For example, the Cult of the Wire was made during the Battle of Sagitta, prompting its defenders to cover the beach in barbed wire, made from the sole facility producing barbed wire on the island. And during the Battle of Silver in War 108, religion became a rallying cry to remind people to recycle the dead and injured into respawn tokens. The island was completely blockaded for days, limiting the defenders' supply runs. So, the colonials made a pile of the injured and dead to recycle them into respawns, creating the Cult of the Pile.
Okay.
Yeah, plasma.
The pile! To the pile! No, I want to be one with the pile.
Even when there was no need to resort to making a pile of the injured and dead, a pile was made anyway.
The pile!
What? No! We don't need the pile yet!
But regardless of religious fervor, when the supplies run out, the defense falters, inviting an end to the siege.
Excellent.
May my sacrifice serve a higher plan as I join from this mortal land. Let your mercy shine upon my face as I join the pile in eternal grace.
Thank you guys. Let's go.
Praise be to the pile, lad.
Amen. This be.
However, some bases are built around towns that have their own supply chains. Resource nodes provide materials like sulfur and scrap metal, which can be processed at refineries to produce materials that can be used at garages and factories to make things like tanks, munitions, and respawn tokens. Depending on what resource nodes and manufacturing buildings are available, a besieged region can be self-sufficient in some ways. Note that buildings like factories and refineries are preset structures in the world, and not player-built, so you can't just set up shop anywhere. It's a different case for player-built facilities that can churn out items like artillery shells and barbed wire. I don't think any place in Foxhole showcases this better than what the colonials called the Free State of the Fingers back in War 110. The war's starting conditions left the colonials and wardens with one entire region each, surrounded by enemy territory, making a natural siege. However, these regions were given access to every type of resource node, except for coal. Therefore, they were mostly self-sufficient, and as the war dragged on, it became clear that the Fingers would remain surrounded. Back then, the world of Foxhole wasn't round like it is today, so it was a genuinely cut-off region most of the time. The colonials would proclaim this as the Free State of the Fingers. While not perpetually staffed, any enemy activity was quickly responded to by its loyal defenders. Bridges were built, resources were shared, public gunboat piers were maintained, and the blockades of freighters were sustained. There were even human buoys.
They're scouting ahead with a radio backpack?
That's the buoys.
Are you guys sniffing the rocket?
Just a bunch of buoys.
And on a few different occasions, parts for very expensive nuclear weapons were shipped into the region when gaps in the siege presented themselves. Even in War 117, during the Siege of the Fingers, we were mining resources and building tanks right next to the front line. Everyone pitched in and set public queues for materials to be processed at the refinery. But of course, there is a limit to this production. A few resource nodes can't always keep up, and local factories have their limits. For example, the maximum output of respawn tokens, called Schlatts, for a single factory is just 450 per hour. During the siege, The casualty rate frequently approached 1,000 per hour, forcing the defenders to run the blockade or starve. A few freighters full of supplies would manage to get through and have their crates of supplies pulled up via crane. A similar situation of building supplies on the front line would occur in the town of Therizo in War 124, as it was a logistics town brimming with supplies and factories. But a stark contrast to this was the siege of the same region in War 121. Terminus is normally a logistics region, but this war it was not blessed with a mass production factory. The Wardens repeatedly destroyed the smaller factories and garage, preventing vital supplies like respawns, basic ammunition, and vehicles from being produced on site. A massive gated roadblock was set up in the last remaining supply road in the neighboring region of Akrithia, blocking any supplies from arriving through the mountain pass.
Oh my god!
Jesus Christ.
The entire region of Terminus was slowly starved into submission. Ironically, the winner of a siege usually comes down to which side runs out of supplies first. After all, the attacker's artillery shells are far more expensive than the basic materials used by the defenders for repairs. So, naturally, both sides want to break the siege as soon as possible, with the defenders wanting to re-establish supply routes and the attackers wanting to storm the defenses. But of course, breaking a siege is easier said than done. With enough supplies stockpiled and blockade runners getting through, the defenders might outlast the siege. But when that isn't the case, the besieged would effectively have a time limit to break the siege. This means they'd need a more kinetic solution. Maybe this meant telling a friendly battleship to shell everything in front of you.
Our battleship's back, they're being shelled.
Oh, yeah, the battleship's shelling us!
Danger close, danger close.
Or a destroyer ramming itself into the seaport at the last minute.
Couple minutes too late with
Yeah,
the
how did you
ship.
guys get through
Sorry
the
guys.
Other times, it involves gathering players for a heroic charge. During the siege of Brackish Point in War 127, the Wardens surrounded the town. All land-based routes for supplies were completely cut off, so the only way to get supplies through was via the sea to the east. However, the attackers held a relic base and set up patrols along the shoreline. Eliminating the Warden relic base was key to freeing up the supply route by sea. And it just so happened that the defenders were left with several tanks and explosives in the town's storage depot. Many different attempts were made to destroy the relic base and other logistics cuts. First, there were a couple of breakaway attempts with columns of Bardiche tanks. Then, some assaults with basic explosives. Later on, the last of the siege tanks were used in an attempt. They managed to occasionally free up the shoreline by applying pressure to the relic base, eventually contributing to breaking the siege for a short while.
Go, 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 go!
Better HED, better HED.
Yes, dead!
The attackers, on the other hand, also want to break the siege. That means breaking through the walls. Usually, the walls of a base are comprised of defensive garrisons, buildings that automatically open fire on enemies in their firing arcs. Or, in the case of howitzer garrisons, retaliate to artillery shelling. These garrisons have multiple tiers, with Tier 3 being the hardest to break. However, while Tier 1 and Tier 2 garrisons can be easily rebuilt after breaking, Tier 3 cannot. Tier 3 structures are made of concrete, meaning that they need to be set and must dry for at least 24 hours. More if rain arrives during this period. So, typically, any concrete structures that are lost during a siege cannot be rebuilt until the siege is over, lest they get immediately destroyed while the concrete is still wet. Using heavy explosives to break and breach them is the usual method of cracking a city. But if artillery can't do it, then organized rushes are the typical go-to solution for breaching the walls. Infantry can rush with explosives, tank crews can ram siege tanks into the defenses, or they can be set on fire. Yes, even concrete can catch fire in Foxhole. Natural structures can be taken advantage of to hinder these attacks. The climb up the mountain that is the island of Conclave can be filled with mines and barbed wire. The slight hill that comprises the final section of Alchimio can be an incredible obstacle to overcome, with waves of infantry being used as a last resort to get into the defensive trenches during the siege of Alchimio in War 126. Beaches themselves have in the past been completely covered in barbed wire to dissuade attackers. These defenses and the measures taken to break them can be truly incredible sights.
Open fire!
But of course, once the defenses are breached and the attackers start pouring in, last stands tend to ensue.
No, don't let them get inside.
Oh my god, that's a lot of bodies.
On small islands, this usually means that the attackers finally brought enough hardware to put an end to the defenders. During the first Battle of Silver, after 2 days of holding off enemy landing barges and making incredible blockade runs, the attackers managed to research gunboats and deployed them en masse sooner than the defenders could, given the distances they'd need to travel. Several gunboats would sink the defenders' supply and defensive barges, and they would eventually shell the relic base until the defenders ran out of materials to repair it.
For the pile! For the pile!
In the second Battle of Silver, after almost 3 days of holding out, the attackers brought a long-hook landing ship and several tanks to put an end to the developing island nation. In the Siege of Gibraltar, waterborne logistics were cut off, and the attackers flooded the base's courtyard, cornering all of the defenders' tanks.
It's been an honor.
It's only over if we let it be over!
At Brackish Point, after nearly a dozen hours of artillery burning and flattening every building in sight, the town base was finally put down by siege tanks, prompting the defenders to fall back to secondary lines of defense.
Hold your ground! The war is lost! Medic!
The logistics town of Therizo would finally fall after hours of intense urban combat, with the occasional landing party arriving at the seaport, ending the war.
Once they get around, they'll get the gun in.
We finished.
Kirknell City would attempt to survive with the absolute hoard of supplies given to the base before the siege. The colonials of the Lynn of Mercy's nuke would protect it with religious fervor as it counted down to launch, while its defenders were pushed all the way into a valley called the Mudhole. Many siege tank rushes, feints, SPG shells, fire rockets, mines, and blockade runs would pepper the timeline of the battle. Last stands in Foxhole are one of my favorite experiences in the game, given the creative tactics and stakes involved. And when the airborne update arrives, I hope that we'll be able to make supply drops. But even without them, I'm sure that there'll be another dimension to sieges added by airplanes. Not gonna lie, I thought I almost broke my hard drive while working on this one.